Hey everyone, I am so excited to be with you all today because we have a really awesome guest, a special conversation that I'm having here with Rachael Maddox, who is a trauma resolution educator, coach, and guide. And some of you may know Rachel's work because we initially connected. We didn't know each other, and we initially connected for an interview that I wanted to do with her for the Embody Festival, which I ran about a year ago, I guess it was. And she was actually the only guest, I think, who I hadn't met at the time that we interviewed. And the reason I reached out to her was because her work was around trauma was just so incredibly exciting. And I had just picked up her book, Secret Bad Girl, which blew my mind. I read it in 24 hours. I was like, okay, I need to talk to her. So I'm really, really excited to bring her back to you guys. And those of you who maybe haven't watched that interview, you're going to get all the new and updated juicy info from Rachael. So Rachael, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm really, really excited because it sounds like you've got a new book in the works. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yes, I'm working on my second book called Sex After Trauma, and the tagline is Reclaiming Healthy Sex, Safe Love, and Intimate Belonging. And so it's really about that. It's what are all of the conditions that make sex difficult when we've experienced trauma, whether it was sexual trauma or emotional trauma, physical trauma, and how do we reclaim our health, our capacity to love, to belong, to experience intimacy in ways that's healthy and enlivening.
I love it. And, I have to say for me personally, this is I'm really excited to read this book because I've had a lot of difficulty, or I've had a lot of, not just difficulty, I've also had a lot of fun.
Right.
I've had like a really crazy roller coaster journey with sex after trauma myself. And I imagine that's the case for a lot of women in my community as well. When I was growing up, I noticed there was sort of two clear responses from women who did have some sort of trauma. Either we go into just total rebellion, taking that power and going and it's sort of a dysfunctional version of power because it's not actually authentic power, but where we go and then suddenly we're like, oh my God, our bodies have all of this insane capacity, and so we go and have a ton of sex. I know that was my my version of the story. And then there's a lot of women I noticed who would go into complete shutdown and got really quiet and didn't at all they just said no to any sort of sexual energy at all in their bodies. They shut down that sensual part of them. So I'm curious, I don't know, just is that something at all that has come up for you in your work or that you speak about in the book?
Yeah, totally. And there's a technical phrase for this, which is hypersexual or hyposexual. The hyper would be I'm going to have all the sex, and the hypo is I'm not going to have any sex. And oftentimes people can go back and forth between the two. So I know for me, I would have my super secret sledding days, and then I'd be like, I need 6 months of celibacy. So in both cases, there's a feeling that you can't really safely manage and embody your sexuality.
That's cool. Yeah, I really love that you're bringing that up because actually, now that I think about it, I feel like I might be going into a celibacy phase. I'm not sure. We'll circle back in 6 months to see if that's true. But yeah, it does. And why do you find that these are the two responses, along with the back and forth too?
Well, these responses actually mirror our physiological response to threat. So when we're feeling in danger in any way, in a micro way or in a big way, our body automatically sizes up the threat that we're seeing and decides what to do. And so often we will do, one of four things, and the real quick version of it is we'll hypersocialize to try to make other people around us feel safe. So that could end up looking like that secret slutting. Like your secret slutting might be a hypersocialization. It might be like, well, actually what I want is love, but what's being put on the table for me is sex. So I'll take the sex because that will make the other person happy and might get me, one, might keep me safer, and two, might get me closer to what I really want.
Mm.
Then there's fight or flight, which is sort of like a faster, like I'm going to run from perceived violation or attack perceived violation. And there's something that I've seen in a lot of women where if there's more of that kind of secret slutting, we'll just call it, and I'm personally consider myself a slut these days, but I'm an ethical slut with standards. And all that means to me is if I have the opportunity to have sex with somebody who I resonate with, I'm going to take it. And that's not like a hypersexuality. That's, for me, a healthy expression of being a sexually embodied woman. Mm-hmm. However, oftentimes what I see in this secret slutting is if you're in that fight or flight kind of mode, you might be going toward sex with your body, but completely cut off in your heart. So, it's like, oh, my body is going to slut. I'm going to be super powerful, rah, 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 but no one's going to touch my heart. And it's sort of this power dynamic, right? And then there's freeze, which is the fourth response, where the perceived success of fight or flight is low. You can tell, like, that's not going to work for me. So my only option left is to dissociate or to shut down. So similarly, and that might end up looking like celibacy, but even more so, when we experience a lot of those hyper arousal states, so hypersocialization, fight and flight, those all put you up into like speed, right? They're all like, like your emergency energy on the inside of your body, your physiology goes inward and upward and fast. And when you're running in that state for long enough, it can be chronically overwhelming. So overwhelming that your body collapses into hypo arousal. And that's where depression comes in, lethargy, chronic illness, zero sex drive. So you might have a super high sex drive that's actually a hyper arousal. It's actually your emergency response. Like, this is how I stay safe, by getting all the people and having all the sex, being powerful. And then you burn out and you go into hypo arousal.
Wow. Yeah, it makes me think of, like, we had this one line in a movie that I co-directed and produced back in the day in my other career called Hannah Has a Hoe Phase. And we had this one of our main characters, Leslie, who was the quote unquote slut, because we were exploring sort of the double standards of all that. She was like, well, you got to fuck them before they fuck you. And I feel like that's sort of that energy of like the hyper, like, got to protect myself, and I'm doing it through sex.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Cool. Totally.
We're doing all of that stuff and we didn't even know it.
Right.
Yeah. What comes to mind with all of this, and what the reason why I fell so in love with your work initially was that when I first got into coaching, I felt like there was a lot of rhetoric around, okay, like, will your mind to be optimistic, and like, all of these tools that are wonderful when you are already regulated.
Right.
And we can talk about what that means in a minute. And so that works really great, but it doesn't work so well for people who do have a history of trauma and find themselves going into all these different versions, these different states that aren't regulated. And
right.
So tends to happen is we flail trying to use these tools that are meant for people who are in regulation mode, and we go like, oh my, and then you just get worse and worse, because you're like, you spiral even deeper, because you're like, why is none of this working? And so for me, that was a huge aha moment in my life, going like, oh, the reason why these tools may work for this person but not for me is because I actually first need to get myself to a baseline before I can go like, sure, here's a mantra on optimistic thinking or whatever.
Right.
So can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, totally. I'm glad you brought that up, because, one of the things that is different about trauma than like a psychological, issue or like a mind issue is that trauma is an embodied violation hangover. It's something that happens in your physiology without your conscious awareness or consent. So our trauma responses, our emergency responses going into hypersocialization, fight, flight, or freeze, it's a non-cognitive decision. So we can't cognitively will ourselves to a new state. It doesn't work. We actually have to downregulate our nervous system. So I can talk about what that is a little bit. And I'll just give an example. So I'm in the middle of a Kickstarter for the second book, Sex After Trauma. And mentally and even spiritually, I have a great strategy. I have been super prepared. I've done Kickstarters before, so I know like the way they go. I know how there's like a big boost at the beginning, and then there's 2 weeks of hell in the middle where no one does anything. And then there's the week at the end where like everything comes in more than you could ever imagine. Mm-hmm. So I've been here. I've run 2 other people's Kickstarters. I've done 3. It's the same every single time. So cognitively, I completely understand that I'm totally safe. And even spiritually, I have deep faith. I know, like on the most spiritual level, that everything is fine. But physiologically, my body went into an unconscious emergency response and has been running on a hyper arousal. And then like for about 3 or 4 days this last week, I totally shut down. And I was like, oh, fuck. And I was trying to do all my body self-care stuff, but I wasn't doing it enough. And so I called up my best friend and I said, Jody, I really need your help. Can you hold space for me while I make my list of like physical self-care things? I know I've made it a million times. I've had my clients make this a million times, but I need a list of things that are super easy and nourishing. So I made a list. I actually have it right here. It just so happens to be next to here. It says easy nourishment, and there's like 30 things on it or whatever. And they're all things that are of the body, right? Drink water, take a bath, go to bed before 10, put music on your speakers, dance, go to the ocean, turn off your phone, water your plants, tidy your room. Like none of them are mental. They're all physical, or things that would engage my senses and help create that feeling of an exhale in my body, right? Everybody knows when you try to do a mantra that isn't true, it doesn't make your body exhale. So for me, instead of mantras, instead of trying to force our way through with our minds, asking yourself, what are the things that make my body exhale, that make my whole system feel, like if emergency is fast and furious and up, stability is wide and rooted and down. So what are the things that create that feeling of wide, like a wide base of support for you?
Yeah, totally.
And so I just took 24 hours and I did half the things on the list and I was like a new person.
Oh,
there was nothing a mantra could have gotten me to.
Totally. Yeah. And to piggyback on that, I always tell my clients now that I am a lot more informed on these topics, that you have to, once it is a body response, a reptilian brain response, what's happening is like, you cannot speak the cognitive language in words or in thoughts or in rational anything. And you have to speak the language of the body, which is felt sense. It's really dropping into your senses. So it's like a song that soothes you, water that soothes you in a bath, letting your feet, play in sand, or whatever it is for you that helps drop you back into felt sense. And of course, breath being one of the key ones there as well, that we can access at any point. That's what I love about it. It's not like sometimes people are like, well, I can't get myself to a beach. I'm like, okay, but you can't not inhale and exhale. Like that's an option wherever you are. And especially if you're having a response when you're, let's say, around people, like you might be around colleagues or family members now with the holidays coming up. It's like just getting yourself even to like a bathroom stall for a moment to like just take the time to like really slow your breath back down and just feel yourself, getting out of that fight or flight response is accessible to you anywhere at any time. So
totally.
I love that came up. Awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about boundaries, because this has been coming up more and more over the last few years in my work, in my community, and of course, in my journey. And, with trauma, many times what happens is we have like a perforation of our body boundary in a way where we start to feel like our body is not actually ours, or we get that unconscious messaging really early on in our lives.
Right.
And what happens is then it starts to translate many times into, again, unconscious, like giving away of our bodies. And sometimes it's not even our bodies. Sometimes it just becomes like our desires and our needs. So we're not even able to really connect like what is ours versus what is the rest of the world. Like there isn't that clear, like sometimes it's literally physical. Like sometimes I actually have to like touch my own body boundary to be like, oh, right, I'm here. So yeah, I want to dive into that a little bit with you. I'm not really sure exactly where to start, but I feel like it's an important piece of the conversation when we're talking about sex after trauma, because I feel like reclaiming our boundaries, reclaiming our needs is so much a part of being able to feel safe in, the world of sex after trauma.
Totally. Yeah. Okay, I'm thinking which direction to go, and I feel like we should go to love and relationships and boundaries. So there's a metaphor I like to use, and actually I have a candle lit, so it's so perfect. There's a metaphor I like to use when it comes to relationships and boundaries, and it's this metaphor of you as a sacred temple. So you and I are holy temples, and I was raised Jewish, and in Judaism, there's a Torah, which is this ancient scroll that's like thousands of, the text is thousands and thousands of years old, and they're handwritten, every single one of them, on sheepskin. And like they take years to make. So they're these deep, ancient, holy things. And they're at the center of every temple. And they're on a bima, and they're protected behind this ark. And in front of the ark, there is an eternal light, an oil lamp that stays lit 365 days of the year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Always lit. And I like to think of us as like that. Like we all have this ancient sacredness that deserves both protection and illumination, deserves something like lit before it, honoring it in reverence to it. However, what happens is when we have histories of being neglected, so when we have histories of like no one lighting a light at our temple, nobody saying that we have anything ancient or magical inside of us, or when we have histories of being exploited, people coming in and just sort of like taking our holiness without our consent, or when we have histories of being shamed or repressed, told that our sacredness is bad or wrong, or oppressed, systemically violated, or manipulated and controlled, right? Like our words are taken from us, misinterpreted. Then what happens? Well, we start to think one of a few things happens. We might think like, well, gosh, all of that violation must be true. I must be bad, which is part of the reason around the name Secret Bad Girl. Like you think that you're bad for all the violations you've experienced, because otherwise, why would people have treated you so poorly? What must you have done to deserve that? You must be bad. So when you think you're bad, one of a few things happens. You say, well, I don't deserve this light of illumination at my temple. Let me go take my light and find someone else to pray to. And so you leave your temple walls and you leave yourself vacant. And this is a problem on many reasons, because one, you're leaving your holiness vacant. And if you're vacant without that light on, things can come in that are unsafe. Because you're not there illuminating yourself, knowing I'm a fucking holy thing. Right? I'm a holy motherfucker.
Oh, yeah.
Secondly, when you leave, your light is more susceptible to two things. It's susceptible to burning other people. Please, somebody give me something to pray to. Like you can burn people with your devotion that's misplaced, or your devotion can get burnt out, can get blown out because it's not within the walls of your own safe, protected borders. So that's one thing that can happen. You can leave yourself vacant and all of the dangers that happen there. Secondly, you could take down all the walls to your temple and say, please, somebody fucking come in and tell me I'm holy. And again, when that happens, there's dangers, because you might let somebody in who's not safe. So they might trample your light, Or you might let somebody in who's not safe, so you might burn them to try to protect yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So all this to say, how do we reclaim healthy boundaries? We have to call our light back into our own temple. We have to say, where has my light gone? Is it dim? Is it in hiding? Is it afraid of being violated because I don't have any walls up? Is it outside of myself because I don't think I'm a holy thing worth praying to myself? Where is my light? Where has it gone? And how can I call it back into my temple? Come home. So I like to guide people through a visualization of calling your light back into your temple, closing all your temple doors, all the windows, locking them, and having a holy moment of remembrance with yourself. That you're ancient, that you're sacred, that you're beautiful, that you exist because some weird miracle happened and you're here. Like, you are worthy of devotion. And from there, like, how does that devotion want to happen? Do you want to dance with yourself? Do you want to sing with yourself? Do you want to pray to yourself? Do you want to compliment yourself? Like, how can you stoke the flame of your own fire so that now you can open the doors to people who are safe, or open the windows to people who are safe? And we start asking ourselves the question, what do I need to feel physically and emotionally safe in my relationships? And when people come knocking on your door, when someone knocks on the door of sex, you say, well, what do I need to feel physically and emotionally safe in sex? And do they have what I need in order to be able to come in? Yes, they do. Great, you can come in. No, they don't. Sorry, you can't come in.
No.
Someone knocks on the door of friendship. Do they have what you need to feel emotionally and physically safe? Someone knocks on the door of coworker. And here's the thing that's hard for people when we've experienced trauma. Knowing that you're allowed to have needs and that you're allowed to prioritize feeling emotionally and physically safe. Even like knowing what those things would even look like. Well, what does that even mean? Like, what? And I'm like, well, I need, and like, maybe we can talk about it, because I've realized that a lot of people can't even identify what their needs are for feeling emotionally and physically safe.
This is a big one. This is a big one, because many times, and I'll say I've been in that situation too, where I've thought I knew what my needs and desires were, and I consider myself generally someone who looks inward and like thinks about these things pretty often.
I think you are.
However, it's amazing to me, it blows my mind how often sometimes it's reflected back to me that I wasn't even, so not only was I not championing my needs, but I didn't even know I had them. And I feel like that's something that, again, goes back to it feels like it's deeply connected to the boundary thing, where it's like when you aren't consistently tending to your boundaries, you don't know when you end and like the other person maybe that you're interacting with begins. Like, I have that happen quite a lot. And of course, more and more so in romantic container, but like it could be with friendship, it could be with a boss, it could be with family, where sometimes I'm so convinced that what I need is actually, it turns out to actually be what this other person needs, and I'm just trying to like tend to them. So it's like, I really, to everyone listening, like, it's so important to consistently come back to like a practice of like writing these things down, getting clear on them. And it's not always just like a writing thing. Like, many times for me, especially the sensuality piece is actually an embodied like experience of it. So whether it's through dancing, through self-touch is huge for me. Like, I can't ever not have my hands on my body. It's like sometimes I'm at the grocery store and I'm like, wait a second, hold on. Do you really want to have your hands on your boobs right now? But like, yeah, well, yes, I do, but do I want to? Is it safe? And so, but doing that is so important, because just that practice on its own is like just a very physical, embodied version of like being clear as to where you begin and end. As well as, of course, celebration of your curves and the sensations of like your skin and like all the good stuff. But even just like continuously doing that is such a beautiful way of just bringing it back in, bringing your power back in.
I love that. The tangibility of like, these are my borders and boundaries. Like, this flesh marks the beginning of my territory. And I do this thing called the alignment sequence that my teacher Bridget teaches, And it's basically like a trauma resolution movement sequence, but a lot of it has to do with having your arms spread wide and basically creating and connecting to your physical boundary of your energetic sphere as well as just your flesh. But yeah, so there was something else really juicy in here that I wanted to talk to about knowing where you end and others begin. And that is, we are so socialized as women to not have needs, for our needs to be whatever our partner's needs are, or whatever the boss's needs are, or whatever the more dominant person's
the kids
needs are. Yeah. And so, when we're trying to figure out, well, what do I need? Even when you can try the reverse. What are the things that I know I feel unsafe with? But we still deny the fact that we feel unsafe with certain things because we're so used to them.
Yeah.
So for me, for example, I have finally owned that I am demisexual, meaning I need someone to connect to my heart to want to have sex with them. And for so long, I denied that that was a need. And I denied that I felt unsafe if it wasn't happening, even though it feels tremendously unsafe for me to not have a heart connection and to have sex with someone. Like, it feels unsafe. I don't like it. And I couldn't own that. Because there was this other part of me that was like, no, but like, I'm a slut. Like, I want to have sex with whoever I want to have sex with, which is true. But to have that condition there, which is like, and one of the conditions for me wanting to have sex with someone is there's a mutual emotional connection, like a mutual heart open toward one anotherness. For me to own that was really vulnerable and tender. And I felt like there was almost shame around wanting love and sex to go together. And I know that that's really common for a lot of people, especially, a lot of people have relationships for a long time that they never have that in. And so they feel like they couldn't possibly ask for it, or just like histories of that never happening. So how could they possibly admit that they need that?
Yeah. I feel like I'm on a similar boat. I'm not sure. I'll figure it out. But yeah, what I really adore about Rachael too is that she just gets shit done. Like, you're so soft, and you're so magnetic, and you really have this sensual side of you that pulls things in. But you equally are like, I'm writing this book. Okay. It's happening. I'm writing my second book. We're getting together the funding. You're self-publishing. Like, you're doing all of this stuff, which is wonderful. And you do it with such interesting, like, perks as well. Like, I was like, looking through some of I've been, hearing about all of the different fun perks on the Kickstarter. And there's just like, those perks in themselves are like a beautiful service to the world. So I just feel like it's like a double whammy. It's pretty great. And so, I want to talk a little bit about the Kickstarter, because I feel like there's, first of all, Secret Bad Girl, by far one of my favorite books I've ever read. And I imagine Sex After Trauma is definitely going to be like up there. I can't wait. So if people are interested in just getting to know you a little bit more and getting to know a little bit more about the project, the Kickstarter has like awesome stuff from just like pre-ordering the book, right? To like, this is like my favorite thing, that you can actually buy a scholarship for another woman to do. Tell me what it is exactly. It's one of your offers.
I have two different groups that run like next to each other, like overlap. One is the Sex After Trauma School, and the other one's the Sisterhood. And the school is 12 lessons, 4 group coaching calls, and a Facebook group. But it goes through a process of claiming your seat of desire, going down into the underworld to reclaim your lost parts, and then crossing a threshold into a new, healthier version of yourself that can have healthier love, sex, and intimacy. And so the content is the same, but the Sisterhood is sort of like the higher level program. It includes the 12 lessons, but then 10 group coaching calls, 2 one-on-ones with me, and a 3-day in-person retreat in San Diego. So but yeah, you can buy a $500 scholarship to either give someone a full ride to the school or make this Sisterhood more affordable for somebody.
Awesome. Yeah, so stuff like that. I've worked in person with Rachel, and I can tell you guys, like, there's something. I mean, online is fantastic, and also the in-person piece, especially around trauma work, is so key because there's just stuff that you can do with your nervous system. And I mean, I remember like coming back from, we did like, it was 2 or 3 days together, just one-on-one in an immersion. And I came back after we had a few sessions together during that time where I got back to New York. I went to see Rachel in DC, and I went into dance at the dance studio, and like the experience in my body was like I was like a different person. All the tension around my neck and my shoulders that I didn't think, like, I've just had it my entire life, turns out it's just clenching. just a protective mechanism. And it all was like so open, and my heart was like, it was just like just crazy. So I'm obviously like on board with her writing and her work as an educator, a coach, and a guide. And a writer.
Well,
so,
also,
yeah,
I have immersions. There's 2 immersions
on the Kickstarter.
Yeah. So if somebody wants to do a 1-on-1 2-day, I'm in
Mm-hmm.
Southern California now, and I have this little amazing house right by the beach, and there's an empty room, and so I have that room for people to come do immersions.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, if you've been thinking about working with Rachel, this is such a great time because you get to sort of do these like 2 things at the same time, where you're buying the service and at the same time you are essentially like supporting so like information that's going to be so valuable to so many women, probably yourself included. And so to me, it just feels like so great when you can do something that's like a win-win-win for everyone. I really, really, really love that. And you know that you're supporting an amazing piece of writing that's coming out into the world. So yeah.
I feel so loved. I feel so seen and touched. Thank you.
Well, I think it's because you have touched and seen a lot of women, their hearts, you know, and through your writing, because really for me, I mean, Secret Bad Girl, I remember I was like, oh, she's going where other people are just not going, you know, and there was a lot of stuff that you talk about that I was like, oh gosh, yeah, that was like totally me. It still, or maybe still totally is. And I'd never seen anyone speak about their journey that way, in such a way that I felt like mine was more validated, you know? So I'm really excited about the tools and the information and concepts that are going to come up in this book. And I just think it's just going to help liberate so many women because of where we are. And, you know, so much this year has been so crazy potent with women speaking up and, you know, everything going on. And I think that the next level now is like an individual one. Like I nearly feel like we've gotten a little bit of the courage because we're seeing it happening in the collective and we have more permission. And really the hardcore work is doing it on a daily basis in your own like relationships, as opposed to just being like, okay, so now I spoke about this, you know, to the public, which is like a huge milestone. And how do I continue to tend and self-care and give myself those boundaries and speak my desires and champion my needs continuously, day to day, moment by moment, which is hard stuff.
Well, yeah. And, you know, I'm about to send out this like FAQ that's like, is my program right for you kind of thing? Because there's so many questions that people ask. But one of the things that, and I just want to speak to this because you're saying this, like tending to yourself on the daily basis. One of the things that a lot of women ask me is like, how long will this take? Because it's so scary to go into the sexual trauma world. Like, and I talk about this in Secret Bad Girl. I talk about it everywhere, really, how much I avoided my own healing. And it was only because I ended up having what was moving toward vaginal melanoma, like right on my clitoral hood, and had a super intense surgery. It didn't matter that I had experienced multiple date rapes in my mid-20s. Like, it didn't matter that I was harassed by my boss. Like, all of these things didn't matter. the only thing that finally got me to seek professional help was like, I couldn't ignore it because I had part of my freaking vagina cut out, or vulva, you know? And so I totally understand, like, if you're sitting there and you're thinking, I don't want to fucking go near this shit. Like, no. And a lot of my clients, like, as we get into the process, they're doing deep work, hard work, powerful work, transformational work. And they ask, like, how long is this going to take? And I tell them 2 to 4 years. Like, I'm not going to lie and be like, this 4-month program I'm doing, you will be totally different. Like, you will be totally different, but it's a process because you're rewiring your nervous system. You're changing a lifetime, not just your lifetime of habits, you're changing a culture of habits.
Yeah.
I really believe, I'm so glad you said what you said about this movement and everything. Like, I really believe that we are at a complete turning point in history, and all of us shifting the way that we do consent, the way that we do sex, the way that we do boundaries, the way that we do education with our future children or our current children. You know, it's like we're the alchemists. They say every 7 generations an alchemist comes along. We are a generation of alchemists that are here to shift rape culture. And so we have to do it ourselves. We have to do it. And it is a fucking bitch. It's a 2 to 4 year process.
Yeah.
But it's way harder with no help, and it's way harder when we avoid it. So I just invite you to come check out the Kickstarter, see if there's some doorway, because the other thing is there's no force, there's no pressure. Like, you can do what's doable. You can do a baby step, and your body, your soul, your curiosity, they know what you're ready for. So don't push yourself to be ready for more than you are ready for. But whatever you're curious about, or whatever that little nagging voice is telling you, like, go to dance or go to yoga or go to that trauma specialist in person or read that book. Like, I urge you to follow your curiosity for yourself and for all of us.
Thank you so much, Rachel. You guys, okay, so the resources again, we've got the Kickstarter, which I will link below, so you guys can check that out, see what Rachel's up to, what the perks are, and support her in writing this amazing book. And wait, I feel like there was something else. Oh yeah, and if you want to watch, if you love this interview and you really want to go back and watch our first conversation, because we have a lot of juicy stuff that's very different. We didn't really overlap much today at all. And you get to hear a little bit more about like Rachel's story, like who, you know, how she got to doing the work that she did, and you know, some more basic stuff around trauma resolution. Then you can also go to the embodifestival.com to just to take a look at that interview. But yeah, it was just so great to just have a fun little convo on sex after trauma today. Thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you for having me. Sending so much love to all of you out there who are in this crazy process. I believe in you. You can do it.
Awesome.